What if I told you that one of America's greatest military disasters wasn't just a blunder, but a betrayal? It's the sweltering summer of 1876. While across the burgeoning nation, Americans are waving flags and lighting fireworks to celebrate a century of hard-won independence, another, far grimmer story is unfolding far away on the vast, untamed plains of Montana. A narrative of clash, consequence, and a tragedy that would forever stain the annals of the American West. At its heart rides a golden-haired General George Armstrong Custer. Once a dashing hero of the Civil War, his reputation forged in the crucible of battle, he is now riding into what he firmly believes will be his finest hour, the crowning glory of his career. He's smiling. He's brimming with an almost reckless confidence. He doesn't know he's riding straight into a storm of unprecedented fury. He doesn't know he's outnumbered 5-1, facing a force far larger and more determined than any intelligence suggested. He doesn't know that the promised reinforcements, crucial to his survival, won't come. And he certainly doesn't know that the names Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse will soon echo through history, not as mere adversaries, but as the ones who dared to fight back, to stand their ground against an encroaching tide. This, my friends, is not merely the story of a battle, a tactical miscalculation. It's a profound narrative woven with threads of insatiable ego, calculated betrayal, ruthless political gamesmanship, and the enduring, unbreakable power of a people who steadfastly refused to be erased from their ancestral lands. Before we plunge into the chaos and the desperate final moments of Custer's last stand, let us take a necessary step back. Because to truly comprehend what transpired on that fateful day, we need to delve much deeper than the simplified accounts found in textbooks. We must unearth the layers of ambition, desperation, and resistance that shaped one of the most iconic and tragic chapters in American history. 1. The illusion of glory. Setting the scene, it was supposed to be a moment of unbridled triumph. The year 1876 marked the momentous 100th birthday of the United States. Across the burgeoning nation, from the bustling cities of the East to the burgeoning settlements of the West, Americans celebrated their remarkable progress. A century of independence, marked by railroads connecting distant coasts, new cities rising from the vast frontier, and tales of relentless conquest defining the nation's destiny. It was an era of expansion, of manifest destiny, where the narrative of progress was paramount. And George Armstrong Custer, a figure already steeped in legend, believed he was not merely a part of that legacy, but destined to be its shining embodiment. A flamboyant Civil War hero with an undeniable flair for theatrics and a thirst for glory, he was sent west not just to suppress Native American resistance, but to shine. To carve his name deeper into the fabric of American mythology. Montana, for him, wasn't simply another battlefield, a harsh landscape to be subdued. It was a grand stage, awaiting the final act of his personal drama. And the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, to the distant policymakers in Washington, they were merely obstacles, inconvenient impediments to the nation's westward expansion. To Custer, however, they were more than that. They were an opportunity. An opportunity for decisive victory, for unparalleled fame, for the kind of glory that would echo through the ages. As he rode toward the fateful Little Bighorn, his signature golden curls blowing dramatically in the wind, there was no hesitation in his heart, no shadow of doubt. His mission in his own mind was crystal clear. Crush Native resistance, claim an undeniable victory, and be immortalized as the quintessential American hero. But what Custer in his hubris failed to grasp, what no one in his command truly understood, was that he wasn't marching toward a quick, glorious win. He was riding headlong into one of the largest, most formidable Native American war camps ever assembled on the Great Plains. There, in the sacred shadow of the Bighorn Hills, thousands of men, women, and children had gathered, not to run, not to scatter, but to resist. This wasn't just another fleeting raid or a desperate skirmish. This was a stand for survival. This was a people's defiant roar against annihilation. And Custer, he was about to find out in the most brutal and unforgiving way imaginable that the illusion of glory can be shattered in a single devastating afternoon. To truly grasp the magnitude of that day, we must first look at the man behind the legend and the ambition, the blinding ambition that ultimately clouded his judgment and led him to his fateful encounter. To Custer the man. Genius or reckless glory seeker, George Armstrong Custer was, by every measure, never meant to be ordinary. Indeed, from his earliest days, he seemed destined for a path less trodden, a life lived in the glare of public attention. Born into a modest farming family in Ohio, Custer harbored an insatiable appetite for greatness. a hunger for renown that far outpaced the humble circumstances of his beginnings. This ambition propelled him to West Point in 1857, though not as a model cadet. His record there is legendary for all the wrong reasons. He famously racked up over 700 demerits, a staggering testament to his rebellious spirit and disregard for convention, a record of misbehavior that stood for decades. And yet, even then, he possessed an undeniable spark. A raw, magnetic energy, coupled with an audacious courage and an almost hypnotic charisma, set him apart. When the crucible of the Civil War erupted, Custer, ever the opportunist, seized the moment with both hands. He distinguished himself through a series of daring cavalry charges, leading from the absolute front, a trait that earned him the fervent admiration of his troops and superiors alike. At the astonishingly young age of 23, he was promoted to brigadier general, a meteoric rise that earned him the enduring, almost mythical nickname, the Boy General. He reveled in it. He embraced the spotlight with an almost theatrical zeal. His uniforms became flashier, more distinctive, designed to capture the eye. The press, captivated by his flowing golden locks and his audacious battlefield bravado, simply couldn't get enough of him. Custer, it became clear, wasn't just a soldier. He was a spectacle, a living embodiment of martial glory. But underneath that dazzling glitter, beneath the carefully cultivated image, lay a man profoundly addicted to admiration. He chased glory as fiercely, as relentlessly, as he chased his enemies across the battlefield. And that insatiable addiction, that desperate craving for validation and renown, would follow him into every subsequent battle, influence every command, and ultimately shape every fateful decision he made. Was he brilliant? Undeniably. His tactical insights and personal bravery were often extraordinary. But brilliance without restraint, without the tempering hand of caution or humility, can be a profoundly dangerous thing. Custer didn't merely want to win, he craved to be remembered. He yearned for a place in history, a legacy etched in the minds of future generations. And it was that craving, that burning, unquenchable desire for immortality, more than any bullet or arrow, that may have been the true force that finally brought him down. Now that we have glimpsed the complex, ambitious man behind the legend, let us uncover the critical moment, the fateful decision, when he crossed a line that history, in its haste to tell the tale of his demise, rarely mentions. 3. The Forgotten Massacre, what happened in 1868. Before Little Bighorn, before George Armstrong Custer became an indelible legend or a haunting cautionary tale, there was another, darker chapter. There was the massacre that no one, least of all the architects of westward expansion, truly wanted to talk about. A stain on the uniform, a whisper in the wind. It was the frigid morning of November 27, 1868. Winter had already crept its icy fingers over the vast, unforgiving plains, and Custer's 7th Cavalry, relentless in their pursuit, was following the faint trail of a Cheyenne camp. At dawn, under the cloak of a brutal, unforgiving light, they struck. Custer, ever the audacious commander, charged into the village with a brutal, almost clinical efficiency. The air was rent by the cacophony of gunfire, a terrifying symphony of destruction. Panic, raw and primal, tore through the unsuspecting camp. But this, it must be understood, was not a battlefield in the traditional sense, not a clash of opposing armies. It was a home, a sanctuary. Among the dead, yes, there were warriors, men who had taken up arms to defend their way of life. But tragically, inextricably intertwined with them, were also women, children, and elders caught in the indiscriminate maelstrom of the assault. Over 100 Cheyenne souls were extinguished that day, their lives abruptly ended in the chilling dawn. To Custer, viewing the carnage through the lens of military doctrine and personal ambition, it was hailed as a tactical success. A glorious, decisive strike against hostile forces, a testament to his daring. But the stark, unvarnished reality painted a far different picture. He had attacked a village led by Chief Black Kettle, a leader who had for years been actively friendly to the U.S. government, seeking peace and cooperation. It was a devastating blow, not just to the Cheyenne tribe, whose spirit was fractured, but to any lingering hope of lasting peace between the native peoples and the encroaching nation. A trust shattered, a bridge burned. Even worse, a grim detail often overlooked. Major Joel Elliott, one of Custer's trusted officers, had gone missing during the chaotic operation. He had taken 20 men, a small detachment, to chase down a group of fleeing survivors, hoping to complete the route. They never returned. Faced with the immediate risk of fierce retaliation from other native bands, and perhaps more crucially, the potential stain on his meticulously crafted image, Custer made a chilling choice. He left them behind. He abandoned his own men to the unforgiving plains. When their mutilated bodies were discovered weeks later, a horrifying testament to the brutal realities of frontier warfare, it sparked a simmering outrage among the ranks of the 7th Cavalry. Some, their loyalty curdled by the grim discovery, openly blamed Custer for sacrificing his men, for leaving them to their fate to protect his own soaring reputation. One officer, Captain Frederick Benteen, a man of unyielding integrity, put his seething fury into a scathing letter. A letter that, like a ghost from the past, would one day come back to haunt them all, a testament to the deep fissures within the command. This pivotal moment, often overshadowed by the grander, more notorious defeat that awaited Custer, was, in truth, a profound turning point. It exposed a man willing to trade the lives of his subordinates for the preservation of his legacy, for the untarnished gleam of his ambition. But more insidiously, it also sowed the insidious seeds of distrust, fear, and deep-seated division within the very heart of his command. Seeds that, left to fester and grow, would blossom into the full-blown disaster years later, on the banks of the Little Bighorn. Next, we shall explore precisely how those toxic seeds took root, corrupting the very core of Custer's own command, setting the stage for the ultimate tragedy. 4. Internal division. Betrayal in the chain of command. Victory in battle demands more than mere courage. It demands, above all else, an unshakable foundation of trust. And within the ranks of George Armstrong Custer's 7th Cavalry, that vital commodity was, tragically, in dangerously short supply. The very cohesion of his command was already compromised, a ticking time bomb of resentment and suspicion. After the controversial 1868 massacre at the Washita River, the grim, unrecovered death of Major Joel Elliott and his detachment became a haunting ghost that stalked the unit, a festering wound that refused to heal. Among the voices of dissent, none was louder, none more persistent than that of Captain Frederick Benteen. A seasoned, no-nonsense officer, Benteen openly blamed Custer, accusing him directly and unequivocally of abandoning Elliott and his men to their fate, all to protect his own carefully cultivated image and avoid any blemish on his record. The accusation wasn't just a whispered grievance in the confines of the barracks. It gained traction, making its way into the burgeoning national press, further fueling the controversy. Custer, a man who never tolerated insubordination or criticism, never forgave Benteen for this public affront. And Benteen, for his part, never forgave Custer for what he perceived as a callous betrayal of his men. The rift was deep, personal, and seemingly irreparable. Then there was Major Marcus Reno, a man of considerable theoretical brilliance perhaps, but one whose practical judgment was often erratic, clouded by a sour temperament and a worsening struggle with alcoholism. Reno, like Benteen, found Custer's arrogance insufferable, his self-serving ambition distasteful, and his battlefield recklessness utterly terrifying. He saw little to admire and much to disdain in his commanding officer. Now imagine this grim tableau. The 3 most senior officers slated to embark on a critical mission against what was known to be the largest, most formidable Native American coalition in U.S. history, barely speaking to one another, privately seething with animosity, and openly hostile in their professional interactions. Instead of the vital cohesion demanded by such a perilous undertaking, there was pervasive suspicion. Instead of a unified strategy, there was the corrosive influence of unchecked ego. Custer, in his characteristic fashion, exacerbated these divisions by surrounding himself almost exclusively with loyalists. His own brothers, his brother-in-law, even his wife relocated to Fort Abraham Lincoln, creating a personal court around him. This inner circle became an echo chamber where criticism simply did not survive, where dissenting voices were ignored, and where loyalty, rather than competence, often seemed to be the paramount virtue. The result: a command structure split not merely by differing tactical approaches or professional disagreements, but by deep-seated personal vendettas and festering resentments. And when the bullets finally started flying on that fateful day, those profound internal divisions wouldn't just cost lives. They would, tragically and irrevocably, define the enduring, infamous legend of Custer's last stand. Let us now turn our gaze to the men who stood on the other side of that formidable divide. Leaders whose unity, strategic vision, and unyielding resilience would soon shake the very foundations of American military pride and rewrite the narrative of conquest. 5. Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, Strategy, Spirit, and Strength. While George Armstrong Custer's command fractured under the corrosive influence of pride and political machinations, a very different, far more unified kind of leadership was quietly, yet powerfully, rising on the vast, sacred plains. This was not the leadership of military academies or political appointments, but of spiritual insight and unwavering courage. At the heart of this burgeoning resistance stood Sitting Bull, a figure who was far more than a mere warlord. He was a visionary, a revered spiritual leader of the Lakota people whose influence extended far beyond the battlefield. He didn't just fight with weapons, he fought with belief, with the profound conviction of his people's sacred connection to the land. His followers saw him as a man guided by powerful visions, someone uniquely capable of connecting the seen world with the unseen, the spiritual with the temporal. He warned early on with chilling prescience that the treaties signed with the U.S. government were hollow, mere scraps of paper, and that the relentless tide of settlers would keep coming, no matter what promises were made. He was tragically proven right. But Sitting Bull was not alone in this monumental undertaking. Beside him stood Crazy Horse, a young warrior of the Oglala Lakota, whose name itself would become synonymous with unshakable courage and an almost mythic aura. Unlike Kuster, Crazy Horse harbored no interest in personal fame, no desire for glory. He fought not for accolades, but for the very survival of his people, for their freedom and their way of life. His quiet intensity and unparalleled skill in battle made him a formidable force. Together, these two extraordinary leaders forged something that had rarely, if ever, existed before on such a scale. A truly united native front. Under Sitting Bull's spiritual guidance and Crazy Horse's unparalleled battlefield brilliance, warriors from the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho nations rallied. They trained together, moved together, and crucially fought together as a single, cohesive force. And for once, they were not merely reacting to the enemy's movements. They were planning for them, anticipating their every move, turning defense into strategic offense. When Crazy Horse decisively defeated General George Crook at the Battle of the Rosebud just weeks before the fateful encounter, it sent profound shockwaves through the U.S. Army Command. It was undeniable proof that native warriors, when united by a common cause and led by such formidable figures, could win even in open battle, challenging the long-held assumptions of American military superiority. Their strength wasn't simply in their numbers, though those were impressive. It was in their profound, shared purpose. This wasn't about conquest, it was about protecting their sacred land, their very lives, and the enduring legacy of their ancestors. And it was this unity, this unwavering purpose, that set the stage for a confrontation that would forever etch these leaders into the annals of history, turning them into enduring legends. Let us now turn our attention to the immediate spark that ignited the inferno. The profound betrayal that transformed fragile treaties into an all-out war. En el corazón mismo de la campaña final de Custer, el verdadero motor no era la estrategia militar ni la seguridad de la frontera. Era simplemente el oro. Un metal brillante que como tantas veces en la historia de la humanidad, desató la codicia y la destrucción. En 1868, el solemne Tratado de Fort Laramie había prometido las Colinas Negras Black Hills, al pueblo Lakota para siempre. Era una tierra sagrada, un lugar de una belleza inigualable y de un profundo significado espiritual y cultural para estas naciones. Pero apenas 8 años después, la palabra para siempre demostró ser un término efímero. Una promesa vacía que se desvanció con la primera pepita de oro. En 1874, bajo la engañosa excusa de explorar un posible emplazamiento para un fuerte, Custer lideró una expedición militar que se adentró profundamente en el corazón de las Colinas Negras. Pero el objetivo real, el verdadero propósito de aquella incursión, era mucho más mundano y devastador. Encontrar oro y, crucialmente, asegurarse de que la prensa fuera testigo de cada momento, de cada descubrimiento. Reporteros ávidos de noticias sensacionalistas siguieron a las tropas. Se tomaron fotografías que pronto circularían por todo el país. Los titulares de los periódicos explotaron con la noticia del hallazgo. Y como una plaga inevitable, decenas de miles de mineros y colonos, cegados por la fiebre del oro, se abalanzaron sobre la región, ignorando cualquier tratado o derecho ancestral. Fue una invasión descarada, disfrazada bajo la seductora ilusión de una nueva oportunidad, de una frontera abierta para todos. El gobierno de los Estados Unidos, con una hipocresía apenas velada, hizo la vista gorda. Después de todo, estos colonos eran independientes, ciudadanos privados, no parte oficial de ninguna operación militar. Así que técnicamente el tratado no estaba siendo violado. La letra pequeña, la interpretación conveniente, se impuso sobre el espíritu de la ley. Y extraoficialmente, el presidente Ulysses S. Grant, cansado de las negociaciones, y ansioso por consolidar el control sobre las riquezas del East, simplemente esperaba que los Lakota reaccionaran. Esperaba una provocación, una excusa para tomar la tierra por la fuerza, para imponer la voluntad de la nación por la vía militar. Y cuando Sitting Bull con la dignidad y la firmeza de su pueblo, se negó rotundamente a vender las colinas negras en 1875, Washington lanzó su advertencia final, un ultimátum brutal. Mueven a su gente a las reservas estadounidenses antes de enero, o serán etiquetados como hostiles. La notificación llegó en noviembre. En el crudo y despiadado invierno, cuando el movimiento de grandes grupos de personas era casi imposible. Era una trampa diseñada deliberadamente para fallar. Si las tribus intentaban moverse en esas condiciones gélidas, morirían de frío y hambre. Si se quedaban, serían cazadas sin piedad. Y eso es exactamente lo que George Armstrong Custer fue enviado a hacer. Ahora la historia de un giro sombrío. De la política de la traición a la implacable persecución. De la violación de tratados al inevitable derramamiento de sangre. Sigamos el camino que paso a paso llevaría a Custer a las colinas malditas del Little Bighorn, a su destino final. 7. The battle before the battle, the Rosebud Clash. Every great disaster, every monumental downfall, often casts its shadow long before the final blow. For George Armstrong Custer, that crucial unheeded warning came on June 17, 1876, a mere 8 days before the fateful encounter at Little Bighorn. It was a sign, clear as a thunderclap, yet tragically misinterpreted or simply ignored. General George Crook and his troops, part of the larger U.S. offensive, were camped along the Rosebud River, deep in what they believed was secure territory. They felt safe, confident in their strategic position. They were not. Crazy Horse, the brilliant Oglala Lakota warrior with 1,500 Lakota and Cheyenne warriors at his side, launched a full-scale, devastating surprise attack. It was an act of audacious bravery, almost unthinkable in the context of previous Native American engagements. Native forces had rarely, if ever, challenged U.S. armies head-on in such a direct confrontation, especially not in the open plains, where the cavalry's advantage was thought to be supreme. But Crazy Horse was no ordinary adversary. He had meticulously studied the terrain, understood its nuances, and more importantly, he knew his men. Crucially, he understood how to break the rigid, predictable rhythm of American military warfare. The attack came from all directions, a whirlwind of coordinated fury. One charge from the left, swift and sudden. Another from the right, equally relentless. Riders, masters of their horses, weaved through the dense brush, firing with deadly accuracy from horseback. The goal wasn't just to kill, it was to confuse, to disorient, to drain the morale of the enemy with relentless, unpredictable pressure. Crook's army, caught completely off guard, never truly recovered its composure. They were forced into a chaotic, humiliating retreat, abandoning their strategic objectives and leaving behind a shaken, demoralized force and the grim tally of 30 dead soldiers. But here lies the most damning twist, the pivotal failure that sealed Custer's fate. General Crook, in his haste and perhaps his shame, never sent word to Custer or General Terry. No warning of the overwhelming strength of the native forces. No update on the ferocity of their resistance. No adjustment to the grand, three-pronged strategy that was supposed to trap the tribes. Custer, blinded by his own ambition and the lack of vital intelligence, would ride forward in blissful ignorance, thinking he still had crucial support from the South when in fact, Crazy Horse had already decisively dismantled one entire wing of the S offensive. It was a pivotal moment in the unfolding tragedy. A battle won by the native coalition, yet a warning lost to the arrogance and fractured communication of the U.S. command. It was a moment that, in essence, doomed the entire three-pronged strategy before Custer even drew his sword for the final, desperate charge. Now, we move to the inevitable climax. The moment where legend was born, where hundreds met their fate, in a valley forever scarred by the clash of ambition and the fierce, unyielding spirit of resistance. The Little Bighorn awaits. 8. The Last Stand. What likely happened minute by minute. June 25, 1876. Just after dawn. The air, crisp and cool, held the promise of a scorching summer day. Custer's scouts, ever vigilant, spotted the telltale smoke rising in the distance. What they soon beheld was a sight that should have given even the most audacious commander pause. A massive village, sprawling across the verdant Little Bighorn Valley, thousands upon thousands of Lakota and Cheyenne tipis stretching for miles. A testament to the sheer, unprecedented gathering of native strength. But instead of waiting for the crucial reinforcements that were part of the grand strategy, Custer, driven by his insatiable thirst for glory, chose speed. He chose surprise. He chose audacity over caution. With a decision that would forever be debated, he split his approximately 700 men into three distinct groups. Major Marcus Reno was ordered to attack from the south, directly into the heart of the encampment. Captain Frederick Benteen was tasked with a wide, looping maneuver intended to flank the village from the west. And Custer himself, ever at the forefront, would take 5 companies and strike from the north, hoping to catch the villagers in a deadly pincer movement. What he, in his overconfidence, fatally failed to grasp was that Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull, with their combined wisdom and foresight, had been meticulously preparing for this very moment for weeks. They were not to be caught unawares. When Major Reno launched his attack from the south, his forces were met with an unexpected, overwhelming resistance. Lakota warriors, swift and fierce, struck hard, their defense a brutal shock. Blood was spilled almost immediately. Bloody Knife, Custer's trusted Arikara scout, a loyal ally, was killed tragically beside Reno, his brains splattering onto the Major's face. Panic, raw and contagious, began to set in. Reno's command fractured. He lost control, and his men, terrified and disorganized, retreated in a chaotic, desperate flight across the Little Bighorn River. Some drowning, others dropping their weapons in sheer terror as they fled for their lives. Custer, pushing relentlessly forward, never saw it. He was already cresting the final ridge, his gaze fixed on what he believed would be his ultimate prize. From the top of what would forever after be known as Last Stand Hill, Custer finally saw the terrifying truth. Not a scattering of easily subdued enemies, but a vast, churning sea of warriors, their numbers seemingly endless, their resolve unyielding. Some accounts suggest that, in a moment of desperate clarity, he tried to rally, sending a frantic note to Benteen. "Big village, come quick, bring packs." A plea for help, for the very support he had so carelessly dismissed. But Benteen, perhaps due to the vast distances, perhaps due to the deep-seated animosity, or perhaps simply due to the chaos of the battle itself, never came. The crucial reinforcements never arrived. Custer, trapped by his own tactical decisions and the overwhelming force before him, pushed forward anyway. In what can only be described as a desperate gamble, he hoped to take hostages, the women and children of the village, to force a surrender to break the will of the warriors. Instead, he found himself swiftly, irrevocably surrounded. Crazy Horse, fresh from his decisive victory over General Crook at the Rosebud, led the charge, his presence a whirlwind of courage and tactical brilliance. The battle that ensued was short, brutal, a maelstrom of violence. Captain Miles Keogh's company, perhaps the first to bear the full brunt of the assault, was overrun first, then Lieutenant James Calhoun's company, and swiftly the rest. Eyewitnesses, both native and later from the grim discovery, described the scene as pure chaos. A deafening roar of gunfire, the whistling of arrows, blinding dust, and the horrifying screams of men. Some native warriors were even said to have accidentally shot each other amid the frenzied, desperate fury of the close-quarters combat. And at the very center of it all, amidst the swirling dust and the dying, stood George Armstrong Custer, refusing to run, refusing to yield, fighting to the very last. Later, the great Hunkpapa Lakota leader Sitting Bull, who had orchestrated this monumental resistance, would describe the scene with chilling clarity. His warriors found Custer, like a stalk of corn with all the ears fallen around him. 2 bullets ended his life, one in the chest, one in the head. It was over. 268 men from the 7th Cavalry were dead. 5 companies, once the pride of the U.S. Army, had vanished from the face of the earth, annihilated in a single devastating afternoon. And still, the myth was only just beginning. Next, we shall see how that myth was meticulously shaped, not by the unvarnished facts of the battlefield, but by fear, by national pride, and by a desperate, overriding need to protect the image of an invincible America. 9. Media Myth and Misdirection. America Reacts. When the devastating news finally reached the East Coast, it hit like a thunderclap, a seismic shock that reverberated through a nation basking in the glow of self-congratulation. America had just celebrated its centennial, 100 years of hard-won freedom, relentless expansion, and a presumed, almost divine, destiny to conquer the continent. Custer, the flamboyant Civil War hero, was supposed to be an integral part of that triumphant story. He was a symbol of unstoppable progress, a golden-haired embodiment of American might taming the wild frontier. But now he was gone, vanished, along with 268 of his men annihilated in a single brutal afternoon, killed not by a conventional army but by the very people many Americans considered primitive, savage, and destined to fade into obscurity. It simply did not fit the carefully constructed national narrative. The cognitive dissonance was immense, the shock profound. The press, ever eager to shape public perception, scrambled to control the story. Some cautiously blamed Custer's undeniable recklessness, portraying him as a glory hound who charged too soon, too impetuously. Others, more eager to deflect blame, pointed fingers at Majors Benteen and Reno, accusing them of cowardice, of a fatal failure to support their heroic commander. But almost no one, in the immediate aftermath, dared to give credit where it was truly due to the strategic brilliance of Sitting Bull or the unparalleled battlefield genius of Crazy Horse. Few acknowledged, let alone celebrated, that this had been a strategic masterpiece by native leaders. A battle fought with astonishing discipline, unwavering courage, and a unity born of desperation and shared purpose. Instead, the newspapers, the popular dime novels, and the nascent art world swiftly crafted a powerful, enduring myth, Custer the Martyr. Custer the last true warrior standing heroically against overwhelming odds. Paintings depicted him valiantly surrounded, firing to his last breath, his golden hair a beacon of defiance. Stories grew, embellished with each retelling of him standing tall amid the fallen, almost Christ-like in his sacrifice for the nation. It was, after all, infinitely easier to worship a fallen hero, to construct a narrative of noble sacrifice, than to admit a crushing defeat at the hands of those America sought to erase, to acknowledge the legitimate resistance of a people fighting for their very existence. And so, the real story, a complex tapestry woven with threads of broken treaties, burned villages, ignored voices, and the desperate fight for survival, was systematically buried beneath towering monuments, solemn memorials, and a carefully curated national memory. But history, in its relentless march, does not forget. Its truths, though sometimes suppressed, eventually rise to the surface. And neither do the descendants of those who stood defiantly at Little Bighorn, whose oral traditions and historical accounts preserve a different, vital perspective. To close this chapter, let us now ask, what does Custer's last stand, stripped of its layers of myth and propaganda, truly mean today for us in the 21st century? 10. Legacy and Reckoning. What it means today. Hoy las colinas del Little Bighorn se extienden en un silencio profundo, casi reverent. Los vientos, testigos inmemoriales, barren la hierba alta, susurrando historias de un pasado turbulento. Marcadores blancos, como dientes de un pain gigante, se alzan donde cayeron los soldados de Custer, mudos centinelas de una era ya extinguida. Y en un acto de justicia histórica largamente esperado, hace apenas unos años, se añadieron marcadores rojos, honrando, por fin, los lugares donde también murieron los valientes guerreros Lakota y Cheyenne. Tomo más de un siglo para que ambas partes de aquel brutal conflicto fueran recordadas en ese suelo sagrado. Un testimonio de la lentitud, a menudo dolorosa, con la que la historia se reconcilia consigo misma. El nombre de Custer en resuna confusa en los libros de texto, en las epopeas de guerra y en las pantallas de Hollywood. Para algunos, sigue siendo un héroe trágico, una figura audaz pero condenada. Para otros, se erige como una fábula moral, una advertencia sombría contra la ambición desmedida y la arrogancia fatal. Pero para las comunidades nativas, especialmente los descendientes de aquellos que lucharon y sobrevivieron, Custer representa algo profundamente diferente. El altísimo costo de resistir el borrado, y el raro, poderoso momento en que esa resistencia contra toda expectativa triunfo. Sitting Bull y Crazy Horse, una vez denigrados como miros rebeldes o salvajes, y no están confinados a tales etiquetas despectivas. Hoy son universalmente reconocidos como brillantes estrategas, como visionarios profundos y, lo más importante, como protectors inquebrantables de su pueblo y de su ancestral forma de vida. Su legado es uno de courage, unidad y una lucha perdurable por la libertad. Little Bighorn, por lo tanto, no fue solo una derrota militar para el ejército de los Estados Unidos, fue, en un sentido más profundo, un espillo. Obligó a una nación joven y orgullosa a confrontar los límites de su poder aparentemente ilimitado y la incomoda profundidad de su propia arrogancia. Y sin embargo, la victoria, aunque heroica y duramente ganada, También obligo a los pueblos nativos a pagar un precio incalculable y duradero. En pocos años, la mayoría de aquellos que habían luchado con tanta valencia fueron forzados a vivir en reservas. Sus vastas tierras ancestrales fueron incautadas, sus formas de vida tradicionales sistemáticamente desmanteladas, y sus hijos, trágicamente, enviados a internados diseñados para despejarlos de su cultura y identidad. Aún así, la historia persiste, una narrativa compleja y estratificada que sigue desafiándonos. Y nos plantea preguntas difíciles, preguntas que resuenan profundamente incluso hoy. A quien elegimos celebrar en nuestras narrativas históricas. A quien, conscient o inconscientemente, elegimos silenciar. Y que significa realmente ser valiente, luchar por lo que uno cree contra probabilidades abrumadoras. La última resistencia de Kuster no fue el final de un capítulo en la historia estadounidense. Fue, de hecho, el tumultuoso comienzo de un largo, a menudo doloroso, ajust de cuentas con el legado de la frontera de Estados Unidos. Un ajust de cuentas que, quizás, seguimos escribiendo hoy, mientras lidiamos con las complejas verdades de nuestro pasado y nos esforzamos por una comprensión más inclusiva de nuestra historia compartida.